Yes? Yes? You're not allowed. Who did you ask? Such a bad lady. Rebecca, we need a photographer for the exhibition. Yeah. You have somebody, or you? We're live? Hi, Caribbean. Welcome to another evening of lovely lectures. And tonight we have a very special lady in the house. Miss Annalie Davis from Fresh Milk of Barbados. And Annalie has been doing a great job organizing this year Tilting Axis, uniting all of us in the Caribbean, and it was a wonderful thing that happened this year in February in Barbados. So she will elaborate after Fresh Milk also on Tilting Axis. So after Tilting Axis, this is happening, and hopefully we will all get into Miami next year in Tilting Axis. So Tilting Axis was bringing all these curators, museum directors, and institution directors like this to Barbados to these conferences. So it was a wonderful time to know all the people that are doing the same job, fighting in their own land, country, island, to promote the arts as much as possible. So with you tonight, with a warm applause, Ms. Annalie Davis of Fresh Milk, Barbados.
Thank you, Elvis. It's really nice to be inside the Black Box this evening. I've been watching this from Barbados, and it's lovely to be on the other side of the screening here with everybody. Tonight, I just want to start by offering some gratitude to the many people who have made Caribbean Linked possible. Since 2012, this project has been growing exponentially, and I need to mention some of the people who helped to shape this magnificent program. First, gratitude to Marguerite Kruver and Gerrit van der Hout, based in the Netherlands, and with whom Holly, Elvis, and I have been working to grow Caribbean Linked and to build sustainability and secure funding for this year's and next year's iterations. Gratitude to Stitch and Dune, our main funder, along with Mondrian Funds, the Prince Claus Fund, and all of the Aruban companies who've offered their support, including Aruba Bank, Marriott Care Foundation, Aruba Beach Club, La Cabana Hotel, Arian Wine Company, Seed Aruba, Vibration, Coldwell Banker, Aruba One Happy Island, Dr. N. Lampa, Caribbean Queen Unoka, Culture Funds, Garage Central, and Vienno. And that's really important that we have local people, Caribbean.tv. We wouldn't be streaming live to everybody in the Caribbean without Caribbean.tv. But that kind of local investment is critical for what we're doing in the region, not just having funders from Europe. Thank you also to all of our soldiers on the ground in Aruba who've been providing administrative support or welcoming artists into their homes and studios, including Avancha and Denise, Kevin, who's here this evening, Jermeel, Ryan, Lydia, Alex, Ciro, Marion, Bobby, and to David Bade, who will join us from the IBB tomorrow. And of course, an enormous thank you to Elvis, who is the epitome of generosity and an amazing host, who has been extremely hospitable to all of us and helping us to build this beautiful program. And then, of course, there's this very special group of people that I need to thank, who are the artist, the art writer, and the percussionist and sound artist: Alex, Leisho, Simon, MJ, Natusha, Manuel, Razia, Leo, Aiko, Ronald, Natalie, and Diego. These creatives have been very carefully selected to participate in Caribbean Linked, but no matter how thoroughly we consider the selection process, we never know if or how these human beings will or won't connect with one another on the ground. And I'm happy to say that this is a very well cohered group. I've been able to see that from Barbados, observing this through our social media and watching the platform at night. But just having landed here today and beginning to develop conversations with the artists, I can see that there's a real synergy and a bond that's building between these artists, and it's really beautiful to see that. Residencies are very, very intense experiences, and much of what happens to resident artists stay with them for a very long time, germinating for years to come, spawning new bodies of work. So let us not forget that that is why we are here, because we respect what artists are doing, we value what they offer the world, and so we work to create this kind of environment where creativity might flourish. I remember on the morning program, Leisho had mentioned that this was the first time he had traveled to another Caribbean country, and that's another reason that makes Caribbean Linked so valuable to many of the participants. And then, of course, to the audience that's here this evening who've been coming out to the presentations, and to those who are watching from around the Caribbean, thank you so much. What I'd like to do is to share 4 of my interrelated projects with you this evening, including a social practice project called the Fresh Milk Art Platform, Unearthing Voices, which is a collaborative archaeological project, my own related visual practice, and a dialogical project currently in progress called White Creole Conversations. I thought I would start by just showing a brief video. So that you would get an idea of what fresh milk looks like and feels like through an event that we hosted last year. Fresh Milk is obviously one of the main partners in Caribbean Linked. It's the name of a social practice project I founded in 2011. It came out of a kind of an existential experience I was having around teaching when I realized 5 years ago that we had a especially strong group of students graduating from Barbados Community College, where I teach in the BFA program. And our attrition rate at that time was about 100%. So meaning that within a year of students graduating, none of them were making any work. And this was a really strong group, and I was kind of nervous about losing them. And so I decided to set up Fresh Milk as an experimental kind of project, and to see whether there was enough critical mass that could hold a space like this in a very small island. It's inspired also by the idea of the way in which women turn their blood into milk to nurture young. So Fresh Milk is a very nurturing space for young artists. We're located at Walker's Dairy in Barbados on a working dairy farm, which was originally operational as a sugarcane plantation from the 1660s. Having been raised on 3 plantations myself, I'm interested in the plantation as an economic model which has ricocheted throughout the archipelago for centuries, wreaking havoc on the region and its people. I'm also interested in the idea of the potential for transformation of the plantation into a site where other kinds of activities and engagements between human beings are possible. Our work at Fresh Milk is inspired by a scientific process called phytoremediation, which refers to the ability that some plants have in their root structures to absorb toxins from a brown field or a toxic field and restore harmony. Similarly, Fresh Milk is very consciously an intervention into a plantation or a former plantation space with programming that is consciously designed as a counterpoint to the history of the plantation. We're working to alter the very chemistry of our own soil, as Barbadian writer George Lamming wrote, by going against the grain of history through the careful tending of culture. While cognizant of and sensitive to the atrocities of our collective colonial past, and aware of my own privilege as a white Creole woman in Barbadian society, as I grow older, I find myself less interested in pointing out or focusing exclusively on historic atrocities, and more absorbed by finding ways to shift ground, nurture culture, and shape new possibilities that are less about us as fractured beings and more about envisioning other possibilities that include wholeness, excellence, critical thinking, community, respect, empathy, beauty, and of course, love. Fresh Milk is located on a site that was historically closed but is now open, on a plantation that was once exclusive is now inclusive. What was a place of trauma is now a place of nurturing, housing a library of almost 2,000 books, designing local, regional, and international programming in the visual arts. In this region, taking care of each other is a radical act, and the arts is a great space to allow the many vulnerable selves to surface in safe spaces. An example of this is Caribbean Linked, a program that demonstrates how we may nurture one another. And the artists gathered here are doing that, taking care of each other in this safe space that's Caribbean Linked at Atelier 89, allowing them to do several things at the same time, work through all kinds of material and information as artists, sift through their own evolving psyches, connect with the Aruban landscape and people, support one another, and make their work. Like the residents here tonight, there's so many people coming to the arts because it's the last bastion of independent thinking we have in the world. And Fresh Milk, like Atelier 89 and ARC and the other artist-led networks across the region, are small oases allowing these different possibilities to flourish. So some examples of what we're doing. We partnered with a local company called Adopt to Stop, and we commissioned 6 young artists to produce new designs for benches that were popping up around the country over 6 months. That's Simone, who's here with us this evening. That's her design. Mark King, who was here at Caribbean Linked, the last iteration 2 years ago. We create possibilities for young artists to present their work. In this case, we were doing a presentation to people from Brazil. So we're giving opportunities for artists to learn how to present their work, to have the opportunity to speak, to become more articulate. This is Mark King, who is a Barbadian artist. This is an image that he produced here in Aruba at the Atelier for Caribbean Linked 2, presenting his work. We also have a strong relationship with the community college. So a lot of the international resident artists that come in, I invite them to come and meet the students and to share their practice, because we're not living in a country where students can go to the Metropolitan Museum and we don't have a national gallery. So we're bringing artists in to have direct engagement and exchange with the young artist at the school so that they can listen to what people are doing, see what they're doing. This was a curatorial duo out of Glasgow called Mother Tongue, and they kind of gave a history of curatorial practice from their perspective and shared their work. We're also investing in artists and offering opportunities for professional development. On the left is Catherine Kennedy, who is my amazing assistant, and she did a project at the IBB that was conceptualized by Natalie McGuire, who's on the board of Fresh Milk and who is here as the art writer. And they went into IBB and did a series of interviews with people working in the arts, and it was streamed. This particular one with the co-founders of IBB, David and Tirzo, was streamed live, and we've archived that. We've been developing strong relationships with entities in Brazil. This is with Casa Tomada, and sent in a couple of young artists to have a mentoring experience. And here is Versha Harris, who is teaching animation at the IBB as part of her residency program in Curacao. Small exhibition space, so we're not really focusing on having exhibitions. There's kind of more public lectures, residency programs, workshops, but this was a small exhibition we had mounted when we launched. Second from the right, Melanie Archer was the co-author of a book called See Me Here, and so this was taken from that event. We also believe that critical reading and critical writing are really important. And so we have a library of 2,000 books, mostly focused on the arts, and a group of young artists and writers who meet on a weekly basis to read and to write very personal reflections on the material that they're reading. So this has become a fabulous resource. Our bibliography is online so that you can see what we've got, and we also offer workshops by residents that come in to do workshops on writing so that we can increase the standard of writing and kind of cater to young artists who are interested in writing more. One of our big projects is an online mapping project. So we've mapped the Caribbean's art spaces from the 19th century till now. And you can go on the website, and as you can see here, you can go to different countries, and you can see some of the main projects that are happening in the arts. There's a search kind of schedule on the right, so that you can search linguistic areas or museums, artist-led initiatives, etc. So it shows the Caribbean is not a blank slate. There's a lot happening. There's a lot going on in the region in the arts. And of course, here's Caribbean Linked that happened in 2013 with an image from Robin de Vogel. And this was the posse that came out in 2013 from Jamaica, Martinique, Curacao, Trinidad, Aruba, Barbados, Suriname, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and St. Vincent. And here, of course, is our beautiful group at Ryan's beautiful home. I missed that party, but anyway, I got to see the photo. We have international residencies, so people apply from around the Caribbean and around the world to come to Fresh Milk. We can host 2 residents at a time. We're a much smaller space than the Atelier. These are 2 Canadian artists that came in to work collaboratively. And we're finding that there are a lot of Afro-Caribbean artists who are living in metropolitan cities in the global north, who feel disconnected and marginalized from that space, and who are seeing Fresh Milk as a Caribbean space where they can engage with Caribbean audiences, reconcile their relationship to this environment. And so the residency is becoming a real magnet. So Cara Springer is a Barbadian Canadian, and this was some work she was doing on the east coast of Barbados. This is a project we did at the invitation of a gallery in Glasgow, part of the cultural programming for the Commonwealth Games, called International Artist Initiated. And Mark King I commissioned to do this piece on the pavement, which he started to research images that he was finding online about the local space, and he came up with this beautiful pattern, cut the stencils, and then we installed it on the pavement. We were there with people, artist-led initiatives from other Commonwealth countries, from New Zealand, India, Cyprus, Nigeria, and it was out of that that Transoceanic Visual Exchange developed, which is a project that Natalie shared with you when she spoke. So many of these projects kind of spawn other projects. And then, as Elvis mentioned, we had a very kind of ambitious meeting in February, which brought together 35 odd people, generally the founding directors of artist-led initiatives like Ateliers 89 and Fresh Milk from the French, Spanish, Dutch, and English Caribbean. And they came in for us to speak about issues around sustainability in the Caribbean, thinking about excellence, best practices, how we could work together, how we could support each other, issues around sustainability for the creative economy. Our second Tilting Axis will be hosted by one of our partners, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, this absolutely stunning space in Miami, which is in the Caribbean. I mean, there's kind of no doubt about it. It's a hell of a lot easier to fly to Miami to Aruba, I can tell you, than spending 40 hours getting here from Barbados. So the next iteration is there, but we have a kind of a midpoint meeting in Brazil in October to engage with the Global South, which is very exciting. So that's the first kind of major social practice project that I wanted to share with you. The second project is called Unearthing Voices, and the conceptual basis for Unearthing Voices, it's a collaborative archaeological project which is also connected to the idea of phytoremediation, which allows me to consider many ways of dealing with the toxicity of our history, and by thinking about creating conditions to propagate new growth. And so in this project, I'm working with archaeologists and heritage studies professionals from the UK and the USA, combined with my own artistic practice and a growing team on the ground. What you're looking at here are shards that I've been finding on walkers where I live and work, that are from the late 1700s, early 1800s. So some of these clay vessels would have been made with local clay, and then the smaller bits and pieces like these would have been imported from the UK into the Caribbean and would have been used by both the white plantocracy and the enslaved and the indentured. The person in the middle is Dr. Niall Finneran, who's at Winchester University, and he's one of the archaeologists working on the project, along with his student Lucy Willens, who's the heritage specialist, and Matthew Riley, who is a US-based archaeologist. And we're working together because we feel as though that we need to create discursive spaces for the next generation to build new understandings of these complex histories, and by exploring and challenging traditional concepts around community, art practice, and heritage. So my own interest is in unpacking the plantation from the ground up by literally digging into the soil to locate the sites of an enslaved or an indentured village at Walkers, where I live and work. I hope to locate the evidence of those who are often left out of history and who will hopefully come to the surface of this landscape, so that the story about the plantation space does not reflect only the privileged experience or the white, mostly patriarchal voice most commonly heard through historical documentation, including wills, deeds, and conveyances, but becomes inclusive of all who live here. The digs will be open to members of the Barbadian public who can participate, and will include a heritage component with pre- and primary school children to engage with the artifacts and ceramic remains to consider history in different ways. I'm in the process here of working with a local Barbadian potter called Hamilton Wiltshire to design a tea service. The British were importing tea and sugar grown on plantations in different parts of the world to England in the 17th and 18th century. The habit of drinking tea with sugar prompted the historian Matthew Parker to write that tea was a blood-sweetened beverage drunk by the British from porcelain teacups. So what I'm trying to do is to incorporate the shards, which is the blue bit from the 1780s, into this new tea service, and to create a kind of a tension between, on the one hand, the sense of sophistication that we may consider about drinking sugar-sweetened tea in refined porcelain teacups by the British, and the flip side of that, which is the conditions under which these agricultural products were grown, to so kind of force those two realities together. And I'm working with a local botanist to develop a local bush tea to help remove toxins from the blood, to be drunk out of this newly fashioned tea service. So you can see maybe that the Fresh Milk as a social practice project and the Archaeological Collaborative Project are both inspired by the concept of phytoremediation and the idea of transforming toxic spaces through activism and art practice. And here's a drawing. I take my tea with sugar, please. So this rhizomatic sugarcane plant is kind of dripping into the teacup that sits on a bed of lace. The third component is my visual practice. I've been interested, as I'd mentioned, in the plantation and land, notions of home and belonging or not belonging, and issues around race for some time. I'm going to go through some of these images quite quickly. Uprooted is a piece that considers the Caribbean as a very migratory kind of space. Just Beyond My Imagination is an installation that remaps the Caribbean as a golf course, and some people feel that the chain of hotels kind of replaces the sugarcane plantations. So in this case, the islands become sand traps and the sea becomes astroturf with no water in sight. It's called Just Beyond My Imagination. And here's another image of Uprooted. Evocations of a Caribbean is a piece where I move through history and time to become all Caribbean women and their corresponding deities, insisting on and claiming the Caribbean as a space in which I belong, and insisting on a shared regional identity. So these handles, these driftwood handles, you can turn, and on one side you would have an English woman, and when you turn it, there's the Virgin Mary, or there's a Hindu woman and the related deity, and so on. This is called Portrait of a White Creole Family circa 21st century. Now you see me, now you don't. And it plays with ideas around visibility and invisibility in relation to whiteness in the Caribbean, where many white Caribbean people are visible as a minority, but simultaneously invisible because they're not read as being authentic. And then the last kind of suite of images, Saccharum officinarum, which is the Latin name for sugar cane. I began this body of work by drawing a piece of Queen Anne's lace on the wall in my studio, taking the pattern from a piece my mother had been crocheting over a 50-year period. And then I drew a ratoon of a sugarcane plant with this exaggerated rhizomatic root structure that began to look like the inner workings of a pair of lungs. And the two forms began to negotiate their boundaries and reach out to each other, rerouting themselves to suggest that identity is not solely within the root, but it becomes something more alive when it becomes in a relation with another person. This is actually a portrait of my parents. My father was a planter, and my mother was a bookkeeper and a housewife. I then decided to migrate the image onto plantation ledger pages. And so there's a growing body of work on these ledger pages. And then I started drawing this broom, which is kind of, I think of it as a 300-year-old broom that's kind of sweeping stuff under the carpet that's been sweeping for 3.5 centuries. And I'm hoping to find time while I'm here to work with Diego to create a sound work that responds to that piece in a more audible kind of way. And you know, here's another drawing of the shards with the sugarcane plant that we've been finding in the gully and the lands around Walkers that are from the late 18th, early 19th century. And a bit of a will, that I've taken words from a will written in 1815 by Thomas Applewitt, who owned the land that I now live on, and even though we're not connected by blood, we are connected by place and by house and by land through history. And I found this and was reading it very late one night in the studio and was kind of, sort of took my breath away. Some of the words from the will that I've reproduced here say, "It is my will that I do hereby direct that at the expiration of 6 years after my decease, my little favorite girl slave named Frances shall be manumitted and set free from all and ill manner of servitude and slavery whatsoever." And I paused not because I didn't know that this existed. It was just that there was this moment of thinking about Francis, who had lived there in 1816, where I now live, that we inhabit this same kind of rhizosphere across history 200 years later. And so just continuing to work with these ledger pages that are from the 1970s. They function as these kind of graphic interventions into the ledger pages that kind of challenge the primarily economic activity that took place on these pages, registering wages, field activity, rent rolls, measuring rainfall, signing out agricultural implements. And what I'm trying to do here is to counter that single story of the plantation through that economic rendering. It's how the British Empire expanded by ordering information in very specific ways, to insert other images of the landscape, of the plant, of people, and of these drawings of roots that speak to this rhizomatic space that I'm interested in, the ways in which we're connected and rooted. And also the wild plants that are now kind of growing up in what were sugarcane fields, these kind of wild plants that are growing across Barbados. And this is kind of like what the ledgers look like. In this case, making interventions into the ledger. It's quite difficult to see, but on the top left, you can maybe have a sense of these white-on-white profiles of a white Creole family. And then the final project that I want to share is called White Creole Conversations, New Ways of Thinking About Whiteness in a Caribbean Context. This is a dialogical project that facilitates and documents conversations about the experience of race in the Caribbean. The conversations are intimate. They take place between me and the interviewee, and they happen without an audience. So there's not a performative element to it. It's about using dialogue to generate an intimate understanding of race. And I initially wanted to focus on whiteness for this first phase of the discursive project because the white Creole Caribbean voice is often understood as monolithic, timeless, patriarchal, and homogeneous. And although I intended to begin the project in Barbados, since I put out the open call within a 48-hour period, I just started to be inundated with people across the region and the diaspora who wanted to participate. And so I'm aware that even though Barbados is a very diverse kind of population, our social life and kinship are predominantly lived in these very subtly separate racial spheres. So the project has now expanded to allow people to participate remotely by submitting text or audio files after an initial Skype conversation with me. My assumption is that there are generally few opportunities for meaningful dialogue about race in Barbados and the wider Caribbean, and I'm trying to initiate through this project a new dialogue privileging open and honest communication by inviting participants to respond to questions about the experience of whiteness in a Caribbean context, while investigating how race is both privately and publicly experienced in a post-colonial Caribbean space. The audio and the text project attempts to remove the mask of the white Creole, unpack stereotypes around whiteness, and reveal the individuality and diversity of this minority population, with the desire to generate self-reflection, self-awareness, and fresh understandings. Conversation, therefore, becomes an aesthetic device in understanding and shaping civil society, and imagines that a more integrated society on these small islands is possible when enabled by candid speaking and empathic listening. So rather than asking, what do you do, a question posed might be, how do you define yourself in terms of race? What is the most difficult conversation about race you've ever had? What is your relationship to the color of your skin or to the place where you live? Have you ever crossed boundaries in love? Have you felt pain because of your race? Where and how do you belong? How do you not belong? Who are you? Rather than continually sweeping the dark stuff of secrets we all have under the carpet, I see our collective work in the arts as opportunities to shape more reflective, critical, beautiful, and ultimately loving Caribbean societies in spite of our traumatic histories, which is why we're all here at Caribbean Linked, which I see as a very big collaborative drawing between ARC and the Atelier 89 and Fresh Milk, with each of us operating as a line within this drawing. In closing, I'd like to invite anyone here tonight who would like to contribute to this conversational project about their experience of race in the Caribbean, and if you're interested, do let me know. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my work with you this evening. I don't know if there are any questions or comments. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry? Actually, I was going to show, we're offline, right? Okay, because I could show one, I meant to show this actually. Let's see. If the internet gods choose to support us. Are we connected? Yeah. So I didn't say too much about tilting axis. I know that Holly spoke about that, but I thought I would just show one of the videos, which is this meeting we held in February.